right, welcome everybody. Welcome back to another episode. I'm really delighted today to have Elizabeth Lewis as my guest. Liz, as I'm going to call her, because that sounds a lot more friendly to me. Liz is an executive performance coach who specialises in neuropsychotherapy. Liz had a traumatic childhood that she disregarded for many years as an adult and went off into television production as a career. But it was whilst filming a wildlife documentary off the coast of South Africa that Liz realised the truth about her childhood and decided to heal herself and to help herself become the best person that she could be. 2 postgraduate psychology degrees later, Liz now works with Type A leaders to help them increase their cognitive awareness to advance their careers and themselves. She also hosts mental health boot camps, online courses, a mental health podcast, a blog, and lots more. So there is so much we can get into with that, Liz. I do just like to start with a bit of background about you in terms of why you are where you are now, and you know your what the origins of you are. That if we can go into a bit more detail from what I've just said, and especially I would love to know about this realization that you had whilst filming the wildlife documentary. How did that come about? That would be wonderful.
Yes. Well, thank you for such a beautiful introductory too. I'll start backwards because the realization and the why kind of go together to a degree. I laugh because I moved out when I was 16, and from 16 until probably 27, 28, I moved every 2 weeks to 9 months. And so I kind of have this joke of I was just like running away from my life problems, and I moved like 10,000 miles away to South Africa, thinking I guess I could escape my problems to a degree. You can't. They follow you. They definitely follow you. And it was there in South Africa as I was listening to my mates and my peers in the production camp just talk about their childhood, because a lot of us were really young, and I was like, holy crap, my childhood was not normal and was super toxic and traumatic, because you don't know what you don't know. And so I kind of joke and I say, God like ripped the curtain from my psyche. I was like, you're going to deal with this stuff 10,000 miles away right here, right now. And so that's when I realized like, oof, I don't want to have the trauma that I've had. I want to get over it. And so I started therapy again, but everyone was just so like amazed to my childhood because my brother's a psychopath and tried killing me my whole life. I'm not kidding when I say that. And I was like, cool, my childhood was traumatic. I don't need someone to confirm that. I now see that. I want to know how to get free from the complex PTSD that I ended up being diagnosed with. I want to know how to like break free from my past and live in the present and create a better future. And no therapist could tell me how to do that. And I went to a handful, and I'd been in therapy since I was 11. And I just decided, as egotistical as this sounds, I'll just get my own degree in psychology and fix myself since nobody knows how to do it. And then one thing led to another, and I started learning about neuroplasticity and the brain and neuroscience and psychology. And I just used me as a guinea pig, and I quickly started to transform myself. In 2017, I had no immune system. They told me to go and live in like a bubble, like Bubble Boy from the movie. And I was like, no, that's not happening. And within like, I think 4 or 5 months, I walked out of an autoimmune disease. I had a better immune system just from doing neurological, psychological work in my mind and just implementing and transforming.
Wow.
Yeah, it was insane. I mean, there was definitely a lot of hard days where, thank goodness for a support system and a puppy dog that loves you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank goodness you got a good immune system before we had a global pandemic as well.
Yes. Yeah, I know timing can be one thing for sure. And then it was funny because in grad school for my first degree, I ended up just being naturally good because my specialty was my subspecialty was coaching psychology. So I ended up being good as a coach, and my professors just automatically gave me some of their overflow to work with. So I never intended to do this for a living. it just kind of fell that way. And I love it so much. I love reading. I love learning about it, that it's just a huge passion. And I just believe you can make the impossible possible, because I've seen it and we hear stories that do it. And at the end of the day, faith and fear are equal in substance. So let's give it all the faith and none of the fear.
I love that. And so before that, why television as well? I'm just curious. Got
Oh,
nothing
yeah.
really to do with this interview, but I just wondered how you got into that.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up with Full House, and I didn't understand why Mary-Kate and Ashley got to start working and I couldn't. So I've always kind of had an entrepreneur mind. I had my first business when I was 6, and then 10, and then 13, and so forth. And when I was 15, I became a professional model, and then I went a little bit behind the camera. I just always loved acting. So originally it was always for acting and being in front. But people treat you like crap sometimes when you're in front of the camera, and there's a lot of misogynistic people out there. And so I kind of got tired of it, and I need a challenge personally. So then I decided, well, I'll just go behind the camera, because I started doing professional theater training at like 8 years old. And so I was like, well, I'll just take what I know and I'll put it in the back. But by the time I left production, I just didn't like how America was doing things in Hollywood personally. I thought that there was a lot of corruption, and I didn't want to partake in it. I mean, like, I think 75% of television shows today show violence, and 60% of those 75% violent shows don't show any consequences for the actions. And yet we're like, why do we have a violence issue in America? I'm like, well, there you have it, dudes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh, interesting. Thank you for that little aside. So I really need to start with the question about what is neuropsychotherapy? Obviously, how does it differ from standard therapy? And you've mentioned that you've just got a natural ability at coaching, counseling people. So I'm just wondering if you can tell us a bit about what your approach is in the therapeutic setting that makes you different.
For sure. So, and I'm going to say this in very simplistic terms too. So there's always the exception to the rule. So traditional therapists typically focus on your emotions and your feelings, whereas a neuropsychotherapist is in the psychotherapy setting is going to focus on your emotions and your feelings, but also your brain behavior connection. And so when I have a client, I listen very carefully to the words that they're saying and how they're thinking, because that actually will tell me what parts of their brain are overdeveloped or underpowered. And so I want to help them have a healthy neurology, because that can lead to a healthier psychology. It's not everything, but it's part of it. And so it just helps me figure out where we need to, honestly, I'll say it this way, it helps me find their core root issue at a faster level, because I know what we need to do. For instance, if you're speaking a lot of fear-based language, then I know most likely you're living in your limbic system. And there's just certain words that over the years of doing this that kind of tell me what you most likely struggle with. For instance, if you have, I'm going to get this confused right now. I think it's when your right side of your prefrontal cortex is overdeveloped, it might be left. For some reason, I'm drawing a blank. That typically means you have more of avoidance behavior, which means you're going to struggle more with depression. And so humans need goals, but we need positive goals. So then it's like, okay, let me help you feed those neurons on the opposite side so we can have that ability to have more of a balanced, healthy psychology. And it's really just, I don't know how it is in Australia, but in America, it's disgusting what therapists learn in grad school. They don't learn enough to really be an adequate therapist. It breaks my little heart, to be completely honest. But there's things that a therapist can do if they're trained in the brain, and if they also are passionate and they can do the research themselves, of where just having a conversation with a client, you'll actually start to rewire their brain. Client's not going to know. It sounds like I'm brainwashing them. I don't mean it in a negative sense, but it's the quicker we can create new neural connections and start to starve or block the old neurons, the faster we're going to get that transformation. And that's why my clients get transformation within about 3 sessions.
Wow, that's so quick.
Right? Just go right to a lot of people like to deal with symptoms when you've got to go to the core issue.
Yep. And that is the same in any health or wellness, setting, isn't it? And unfortunately, our whole culture and society, and we are the same as America in this way, is, we all want a magic pill. We all want to
Yes.
just be able to, take that magic pill, or, it's not necessarily a pill, but, I just want to be able to do one session and then I'm better. And it's
Yes.
just, if you've been dealing with something, or something's had an impact on you for the whole of your life, then you cannot expect that it's just going to take, one little thing, one little pill, one little whatever, and everything will be different. But if you're getting to the root cause of that, then you can, cut it off, destroy it, replace it at that level.
Exactly. It's, and it's effort. At the end of the day, we just have to hone in our effort and just kind of let go of the outcome sometimes.
Yeah. So in that situation where you've worked out that somebody is working from a place of, I can't remember what you just said, fear, or, they need positive goals. So can you just talk us through an example of what a scenario might be?
Yeah, I'll just use myself for some of this, not for one of them. So there's something called a limbic loop. So depending on when you've had trauma, your brain can be wired differently, because until you're about 11, you can't think abstract and your brain doesn't fully mature until age 25. So there's lots of time we have as youngins that unfortunately can scar us and cause obstacles for our future. My father died right after my 7th birthday, and then most of my family, except for my mom and my brother, died afterwards. Right after my dad died, I was going to funerals every week, then it went to every month, and then every year. I mean, it was like death, 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 death. Now, my dad had me when he was 61 years old, so it might be important to understand that majority of my family was older too. Not that it matters when you're 7, but just for context. And when my dad died, my brother started becoming really violent and abusive towards me. He was kind of like my protector. So what we want to have happen is prefrontal cortex needs to wire to your limbic system. Unfortunately, because I was constantly experiencing hardship, you could say, or suffering at such a young age, my brain more so wired a limbic system to prefrontal cortex. And what that means is that you're always in a fight, flight, or freeze or fawn type of mentality. So I lived in my closet as a little girl because it was like the safest place for me. And I could listen for when the insanity of my brother was going to come about. And so when I moved out at 16, I was like the slightest little noise. I was like, where do I need to go? Where do I need to hide? Right. So I was always really vigilant, like hyper vigilant, could hear conversations across the hall, was always on edge, just could not get out of it. And so that limbic loop, so a limbic loop is kind of where you're constantly in rumination, right? You're always thinking about those past events. You can't let them go. They're kind of entering your psyche, even at an unconscious level. So you might not be always consciously aware, but you're sweating a lot, you're anxious, you're right. There's somatic sensations that we can have. And this was actually what was destroying my immune system, because fear is the number one killer at the end of the day. I mean, it's just insane what fear can do. And so when I started to learn about the limbic system and the thing called a limbic loop, where you're just stuck in this fight or flight freeze, because your limbic system is what codes all the information, if you will, that comes into your mind. I learned techniques, and they're so simplistic that it feels like they wouldn't work. They're so simplistic, to help me get out of that limbic system so I could breathe and so my anxiety could go down. Because what people forget is thinking actually changes your neurology. It's crazy, right? And so the key to neuroplasticity is repetition, changing your vocabulary, and literally thinking new things at the end of the day, which is a little bit easier said than done. But what I would do is I would have to start to become really conscious. For instance, if I heard a noise, or even perfume used to make me have a sore throat. So multiple chemical sensitivity is very normal when you have limbic or trauma issues. And so perfume would give me a sore throat. And I remember one day I was in a yoga class and I was like, okay, I'm going to stay here and just almost like exposure therapy with the perfume. But then you do this where you say, hey, brain, you're sending me false information. The perfume is not impacting me. I'm safe and I'm healthy and I'm doing things differently. Right. And you just say that over and over. Sometimes it's like every nanosecond, because your amygdala, when it feels a threat, can override everything within a nanosecond. I mean, your amygdala is really fast to get on top of things. So sometimes it's you catch it and you work backwards. backwards. And if you've ever been in a conversation where there's been like a loud boom or something, you kind of forget what you were talking about. And once you realize everything was safe, that's kind of what you're doing. It's same with chiropractic, right? It's interrupt patterns, interrupt patterns, interrupt patterns, interrupt patterns. That's kind of the key. So you can tie in like physiology in the sense of snapping or hugging yourself, just to kind of bring in an additional support system. Because when you can bring your emotions, your physiology, and your psychology together, typically change happens at a faster rate. And so it's just changing the way you think to be more of what you want to see at the end of the day. Because going back to faith and fear are kind of equal in substance. When we project what we don't want to see, that's fear. When we project what we do want to see, that's faith, if you will. And so it's constantly changing the dialogue and reminding yourself you're safe, assuming you're truly in a place where you're safe. Obviously, if you're not, it's not going to work. But that's just one technique. Another technique, going to the avoidance versus, so you either are going to create avoidant goals or you're going to create positive goals. People who are going to create avoidant goals are going to tell me a lot of what they don't like. They're going to speak a lot of negativity, a lot of no's, a lot of not, a lot of I can't type of things. And so an example of this would be, for an avoidant goal would be, I'm moving to the country to get away from the noise, right? You are motivated by what you don't want to deal with. A positive goal would be, I'm moving to the country for peace and quiet. So it's a shift, and it sounds like I'm splitting hairs, but it's the difference between a healthy and unhealthy psychology. It's also the difference from pessimism and optimism, which are basic things we need to, optimism is what we need to have if we're going to encourage our hope and continue to grow. And so those are just two very simple examples of what I was sharing there.
And yeah, so it's really about the language in a way, isn't it, that you're using? And so when you're saying this stuff, are you, do you need to be saying it out loud, or is it just repeating it in your mind silently?
That's going to be a little bit dependent on the person. This is where I say bring your unique self to the table. The first thing is you've got to be willing. You've got to have an open mind to think and see things differently and try things differently. When you can, I say do it out loud, because it's something really powerful of your like inner ear hearing your own voice. But at the same time, like if you're in the middle of a work meeting or in your kid's school play, you can't be like, hey brain, I'm safe. I'm safe. Like, right. You can't really do that. And so there's things that like you have to be willing to manipulate and kind of recalibrate when the moment arises. I mean, I should have died from an eating disorder. And I remember a few years ago, I was on a walk with my husband, and it sounds so silly, but it's normal for people who've struggled with eating disorders. My sports bra was so tight and so uncomfortable. It was making me feel fat, as silly as that sounds. And I just remember under my breath in the middle of a conversation with him, I was like, hey body, hey brain, you're safe. You're sending me false information. Everything is okay. I'm not fat. I'm good. I'm thin. I'm working out. I'm doing the things I need to do. And it's almost like parenting that inner child inside of you, because your brain can send you false information. This is why we cannot fully trust our feelings, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's so with the finger snapping, is there something that you can do instead of that, like if you are in your kid's school play, that it's not going to be so obvious? Are there other sort of physical things you can do?
For sure. And you don't even have to snap where you like make a sound too. But this is where, again, bring your unique personality to it. Some people like to touch their hearts. Some people kind of like to like cross their arms and like hold themselves to a degree. You could take steps backwards. You could take steps forward, sideways. I mean, it's just any motion that could help you create a more of a disturbance in that pattern, if that makes sense. So we think in association. So we're just trying to create more of association. So like when you get this, we go this way versus going that old way, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, I read a statistic on your website, which I have heard before, that we think about 95% the same things every day, and then that 80% of our thoughts are negative, which is just incredible. Why is it that our brains develop like this, and how can we use neuroplasticity to our advantage to try and reduce that 95%? Is it possible to do that?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I actually read an article a few weeks ago that this blows my mind. You can have 1 to 99% of your thoughts being negative. Like, oh my goodness, That's insane. No, break that right now.
Mhm.
Um, neuroscience is still a very new science, believe it or not. The brain is extremely complex. We know that thoughts typically are sparked due to external stuff, but that external thing you see can, spark an unconscious memory at the end of the day. And humans are creatures of habits at the end of the day. We don't want to admit that. Just like we have a default mode to the grocery store, typically we have a default mode of thinking. And perspective is something that we can't clearly define in psychology, because however you make meaning out of life is going to be influenced on how you think, especially those core beliefs, if we use the cognitive behavior therapy model. So I don't fully know why we are this way. I will do more research on that to learn, to be completely honest. Can you change? Absolutely. One thing I encourage people to do is get clear on, what do you want to think? I like to tell people to have like 7 buckets of thinking. And what I would do is like, is this thought loving? Is it true? Is it worthy of praise? Is it encouraging and kind? I wanted to always be that person when you were in my space. You just felt like love coming from me, and acceptance and psychological safety for sure. And so I created buckets that kind of honored that reality that I was trying to do. And I remember I would go on walks, or I'd be thinking, I'd be like, ooh, does that thought honor any of these buckets? If not, you got to get out of here. And unfortunately, a lot of people are mindless with their thinking. Like, I mean, I don't know if you've done this, but I'll admit that I've done this. I used to like drive down the road and like killing off my whole family in my mind. And I'm like, how would I survive? What would I do? Like kind of creating worst case scenario for fun. And I stopped doing that. And it's just like, check in. What are you thinking? Leveraging mindfulness with your thoughts is so important. You have to start to grow awareness on, what are you thinking? Is it going to resonate to what you want? Because we've proven in neuroscience, and the funniest thing to me is most religions say the same thing too, is you work to create your most dominant thought. So if you don't like your life, your thoughts got you there at the end of the day. I mean, yes, there's the exception to the rule. No, you can't control where you're born, what color you are, or what have you. But at the end of the day, where you are currently, your thoughts most likely got you there to a degree. So I tell people, especially my clients, when they first come see me, write about your ideal self, remove all constraints, time, money, skills, write it in the present tense, and read it every single day. Because what we've found, and this again shows you the power of your thoughts, is if you intentionally read over how you want your life to be, what you want to think about, and you do that for an hour a day accumulatively for 180 days straight, so 6 months, by the end of that 180 days, you'll be 90% there, or have more clarity on the next steps to continue to get there, because some of the stuff's obviously going to be a little complicated, and it's insane just from thinking. But most people focus on what they don't want versus what they do want, which is why, I think we've personally positive thinking that's toxic. I don't even remember what it's called, toxic positive thinking or something, annoys me, because I'm like, you can't blame a person for being overly positive. I mean, perspective's perspective. We can't really say it's right or wrong. It seems like there's a lot of pessimists who've gotten upset at the positive thinking at the end of the day.
Well, it sounds like we're all, pessimists by nature for some reason that we need to find out. I mean, I guess it all comes back to, caveman days of we're in so much more physical danger than, not everyone, but a lot of us are these days. And the brain just developed from that place of, checking that everything's okay constantly, and fearing everything because we didn't know where the next saber-toothed tiger might come around the corner from.
Well, interesting enough too, we're actually wired for love. That's why it feels good. That's our default way, is being wired for love. And if you kind of think about it in this perspective, if we were wired for fear, it would feel better. And there's 2 types of fear I like to tell people. It's like the God-given fear, like the saber-toothed tiger, versus the, you're manufacturing the fear because it's not really there, but it's being projected based off of your past, if you will.
Yeah.
One question I like to tell people, which might be beneficial here, is like, if I could strip away all your fear, all the pain, all the negativity, all the rejection, all the shame, all the guilt, every bad thing that impacted you, who would you be?
Yeah. That's a really good question, isn't it? And so just going back to what you said before about, so then therefore, if you write down, well, who do I want to be? You write some piece about this is who I would be if I had no constraints. And you mentioned reading that for an hour a day. And I'm like, well, nobody's going to do that. So what would you say is the, manageable way to do that kind of thing?
Yes, associations. Create associations to help you, remember when to do it, because you have time. It's just, are you willing to do it? And it can be 15 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 2 minutes there, 3 minutes there. Like, just find a way. One thing that I did and still do is I like to exercise. So I would do it when I was exercising. Labyrinth walks are a great time to do it because walks just naturally create increased creativity. And so it's a perfect time for you to think on those things as well, and also bring in that visualization piece. And labyrinth walks are where you just don't have to pay attention to your path because it's so common sense to you. So if you don't have an actual labyrinth, just find a path in your neighborhood, memorize it, and don't think about it. I used to write it on note cards, like 5 of them that I really wanted to like master and memorize, because it might take some time to memorize your list too. And like if I was in a doctor's office waiting, I would read it then. If I was in the carpool line, I'd read it then. I would record myself saying them all and I would play it as I would drive to a stop. So it was all like, how can I quickly program my brain? Because it is true. I mean, everything we do as humans, we have to learn. We have to be taught these things. So find your way of learning and pay attention to it. I will tell you, in the mornings, prayer is really important to me personally. So in the mornings, I kind of bring it into my prayer time of just thanking my God for all that he's bringing me and, letting it go, because kind of going back to just how fear works, when we're constantly in fear, it's because we're really living in the future, in the past, and we're missing the present. If you can learn how to hone your focus to be in the present, because it's the only time you exist at the end of the day, it's amazing the amount of stress that just naturally falls off of you. Of course, you have to practice this because it's a focus you have to learn and practice. But that would even be a great time of just like, okay, I'm going to take 5 minutes of mindful meditation and just recite and envision my list. And anytime a worry or the future or the past comes into mind, I'm just going to let it go like a gray cloud.
But what's coming to me is, I'm reading this list, or I'm listening to this list if I've recorded it, and I reckon I'm still going to get those little monkey mind thoughts coming in going, no, that's rubbish. Don't be silly. So what do you do about that?
That's brilliant. I'm so happy you said that. That is a great opportunity then to put on the Sherlock Holmes mindset, I like to say, which is just being that detective, if you're not familiar with Sherlock Holmes, and just being very curious and looking more at data and the big picture versus that small little weed, if you will, and exploring, okay, what's making me not believe this is possible? Because maybe it's your low self-esteem coming to the table. Great. Here's an opportunity for you to start being intentional about working on your self-esteem. Go get a coach, go get a best friend, go get a therapist, go get a book. Whatever you need, go get it and be willing to do it. Or maybe it's going to take some time to build up your faith. Maybe you really believe you could have that in the like 25 years from now, but you don't think it's possible right now. Well, are you willing to maybe learn the skills or do the things that are in your control now to grow there? Do you really want it? Do you want it for vain reasons? I mean, I have a lot of clients who just want to be a billionaire just to flick off a person who hurt them in first grade. I mean, sorry, that's being vain. Get over yourself.
Yeah. Love it. And another question that I had was, I know I've heard before that listening to things like right before you're going to sleep. So if you recorded your voice saying all this stuff and you listened to it right before you went to sleep, that's a really powerful time for your brain to receive information. Is that true?
It is. And I'm so happy you said that because I actually forgot this fun fact. So we think in 2 different ways: sensory-based thinking and language-based thinking. Language-based is what you and I are doing right now by verbally talking. An example of sensory-based thinking is when you like slam on brakes because you see a red light or a child cross the street, right? You don't go there, hey, Liz, you see a child, you should maybe slow down, right? You just do it, right? Before you're even aware. And your sensory-based thinking is really connected to your unconscious mind, and it's 4 times faster than your conscious mind, and it never shuts off. And so when you read or study right before you go to bed, you're still chewing on it as you're sleeping, because you've actually kind of put it more in your sensory-based thinking. It's like if you've ever awoken in the middle of the night and you're like, oh, I have that idea now, or oh, I get it. It's because your sensory-based thinking was still working as you were sleeping. Or if you've ever like woken up and you're like, oh, now I understand why I was upset about whatever happened yesterday. It's because your brain was still working on it at the end of the day. And the cool thing too here is when you have a clear goal, and you're really putting effort to that goal, whatever you're spending your time infusing at night, you're just going to help kind of encourage getting that goal by just kind of training your reticular activity system, which brings in our stimuli, or I'm sorry, which highlights whatever we tell it, because there's just too much stimuli in the world. And so there's so much benefit of doing that 100%. Even just having random things placed in your office or in your car that is empowering messages, I mean, that eventually gets into your psyche.
So really, because I know a lot of people, like I use affirmation in my work, whenever I'm, doing a healing session with a client, we set a goal for the session, what is it that you want to use the energy for today? And then at the end, I will send them away with this goal or intention and suggest to them that they use that as an affirmation. So,
Yes.
but I know that a lot of people, and look, to be honest, for myself personally, I can find it a bit, I don't know, twee or something. And obviously there's something I've got to work on there. But you're really saying that affirmation is very powerful. I mean, that's basically what this whole, you write this thing about how you want to be, and that is a massive, big affirmation, isn't it?
For sure. In fact, I tell my clients, if you write in the present tense, you should have a tremendous list of I am statements. And I agree on your comment. Sometimes I'm like, and it's funny, in my experience, what I'm learning is a lot of the things that you think wouldn't work, and the things that you think would work don't work. So it seems like the world's really backwards. And one thing that I really am seeing more and more, and science is proving it, the spirituality practices have always proven it, which is you have to believe you have it before you'll see it. It feels awkward. I remember, so in 2019, I was dying from a weird brain condition. I was on the way to Johns Hopkins, which is like an elite hospital in America. Because no one could tell me what was wrong with me. It felt literally like my brain was on fire. I just wanted to like cut my skull off and like pour cold water on it, and it would be excruciating. I had to shut down my business in 2019 for a year. I lost so much weight. It was awful. And I just started doing all this research in my faith and so forth, and just like, I'll do anything. I was so desperate for healing. And I just remember starting to behave and act as if I was healed, as if I was fully healed, even though I did not feel fully healed. And some days it was hard because you have to essentially go against your bodily sensations, which just makes you feel freaking crazy, and go, no, I'm great. I'm awesome. Like I would go up the stairs, like pretending I was with my friends, like with a cup of wine, laughing, like, oh, I'm great. I feel fine. Like it sounds so silly and stupid. But over time, I ended up walking completely out of that brain condition within, like, I think 90 days of being really focused, of reciting affirmations, reciting prayer, going against it, doing everything that was kind of creating the pain. I would like just do it more. It sounds super weird, I know. And I just kept believing it was going to be gone. And in time, it completely dissipated. And I have no idea what it was.
Wow.
Don't care to know. But I was just like, I can't do this, because Johns Hopkins is also quite expensive after a while.
Yeah, I'm sure. Wow, that's an incredible story. Okay, so there was something I was going to ask you then. I can't remember. It's gone. Anyway, I might come back. But I know that I did myself your thinking traps quiz that is on your website. So I just wondered if you can perhaps talk a bit about what thinking traps are. Are there some that are more common than others? And if anything comes up, I can tell you what mine are.
Oh, sure. Do you want to start with that one? Do you
Yeah,
want me to start
sure.
with the breakdown?
Sure. Well, actually, why don't you just say in general
Yeah.
what thinking traps are first?
Sure. So a lot of therapy doesn't work. Cognitive behavior therapy has been proven to be the most effective at a 70% success rate. So like hold that loosely. And what the cognitive behavior therapy says is that we all have automatic thoughts that just come to us, like they're just reactionary. And when they're a negative automatic thought, they're called cognitive distortions, is the jargon. The slang can be thinking traps, stinking thinking, toxic thinking. And so it's your dysfunctional way of thinking that's automatic. And there's about 17 categories, you could say, like all or nothing, shooting yourself, which is just fun to say, I'll be honest. Discounting the positives, mislabeling, labeling, thoughts are true. And so it's just kind of more of an overarching umbrella. And then you can figure out which one you struggle with the most at the end of the day. We all have cognitive distortions, and it would make sense with 95% of our thoughts being the same every single day and 80% being negative. So this is like no harm, but if you start to get aware of what your automatic thinking patterns are, you can actually start to identify your core beliefs, which are at the end of the day, the root to those automatic thoughts, which is really helpful. And if our thoughts are going to be the same every single day, well, might as well get ahead of it instead of being super surprised by it. And I have seen a commonality. So I used to do psychometric testing. I'm a personality theorist expert. And so I started to quantify like what my clients were saying and their results with their personality type or their temperament type. And so if you're highly conscientious, meaning like you like rules, you're moralistic, you probably are going to struggle with perfectionism, and you're going to have a lot of should and all or nothing thinking tied to it. I've seen
Yep,
where
that would be
there's,
me.
yeah, that one's a big one. That one's a big one. And I've also seen where like labeling or mislabeling. So essentially, you meet a person once, they do something, and bam, you've just given them a label. Finite is really popular with certain personalities that are a little bit more dominant and aggressive and almost critical sounding at times. Discounting the positives is also a really big one that can come across for people who struggle with rigid rules or might struggle with a little bit of pessimism and depression as well, because they're focusing on how, that one thing was off, right? Like you got all A's, but this one class you got an A-, so you must be a loser now.
Yeah.
Stupid.
Yeah. That wasn't one of mine.
And then I will say, if you struggle with jealousy and bitterness, if only thinking, I've seen that one a lot.
Yeah. So my other ones were blame was an 8.5, and emotional reasoning. Now that was one that I'd love you to talk a bit more about.
Emotional reasoning is essentially where whatever that emotion that's kind of overwhelming you is how you make decisions. So we really need to be making decisions as with our values, because our feelings and our emotions can change so much. And so emotions are just kind of like where you are consumed by your emotional thoughts and you use them to make decisions or judgments about a situation, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, and blame, that might have been when you lost me.
Oh yes, blaming.
Yeah.
Blaming is a fun one. I've struggled with that one too. Blaming is sometimes when we essentially we blame other people for our issues, right? Like, and it's not even other people. Sometimes it can be blaming yourself.
Yeah.
And it's really denying your role in the situation. Like maybe you say, if only I were younger, I would have a better job. So you're almost making excuses to things versus taking accountability. Now, sometimes there is no accountability, but it's wanting to find an objective, concrete reason to why things aren't going the way you would prefer. Does that make sense? It's like we need that concrete reasoning.
So something that you said before we even got into the thinking traps, but then it's come up again with what you've said there is, I guess my question is around honoring when you are feeling a negative emotion, like, you are feeling angry or you are feeling sad. I do think it's important for people to give those so-called negative emotions their space as well. So How do
Yes.
you kind of balance and juggle that so that you don't, I guess, get trapped in that and constantly repeating it, but you do let yourself feel that for however, whatever
Yeah.
period of time is appropriate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, just to kind of separate allowing space for negative emotions and thinking traps, which kind of fall into that negative dysfunctional thinking. The thinking traps are going to be that automatic, like nanosecond scenario. And so it's not necessarily going to be truth. It's just kind of the perspective or the meaning that you're making out of life to kind of give yourself a reasoning. When you're angry, when you're even sad or scared or frustrated or feel shamed or whatever it is, it's so much better, like you're saying, to address it than drink it away, smoke it away, sex it away, whatever it might be. And really, the best thing to do, a lot of people might not like like the answer because it's not fun, but it's sitting with it. It's practicing radical acceptance and mindfulness where you're not judging yourself, you're observing yourself. I like to tell people, find a safe space in your home or somewhere where you can just kind of breathe and not be bothered for a little bit. And then internally, just imagine yourself at a park or something and go sit on the bench in your brain or be a fly on the wall and just observe the thoughts. I love to journal. I've been journaling since I was 6. So this is where I'll journal things. And I again, putting on that Sherlock mindset, explore them with curiosity. Be curious. Don't be judging. Don't be like, this is how I have to be. I mean, we all have weird thoughts and sensations and feelings, and nobody can say it's right or wrong at the end of the day. That's really quite unfair. You might have some dysfunction in the thinking for sure. I mean, that would be fair. But what I like to tell people is really allow yourself to experience it and feel it. Do your best to kind of keep it to, at least a 48-hour period. I only say that because you don't want to ruminate and allow it to brood and take over you. We got to be tough. And I say things that sometimes annoy people, and I understand that, but sometimes you just got to toughen up and you got to just choose to make the decision to let it go. Easier said than done, by all means. Especially when it comes to forgiveness. But it's when you're at a place where you're like, okay, I can hold this, and the intensity, maybe you want to rate the intensity of on a 1 to 10 scale. I feel this emotion right here. And then you explore it, you're curious with it. Maybe it gets down to a lower number. Then I tell people is like, what was the blessing? What was the benefit? What did that teach you? Because at the end of the day, every situation is like a seed, and it contains both negative and positive elements. Now, you can't think on two things at the same time. You can't think about the past and the future simultaneously. You can't think of a grasshopper and a peanut simultaneously. So this is where I say, like, now let's just focus on the positives. What did it teach you? What did you learn from it? How did it grow you? How are you better from it? And find that positive, optimistic spin. And it's there. You might have to bring out like a nanoscope to see it, but it's there. But whatever you focus on in the brain, it will grow.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. And you mentioned just briefly before something about personality traits. So is there any easy way that you think people can come to understand their personality traits and, use them to their advantage, or, train themselves into different personality traits? Is that even possible?
It is. So by the time you're 10 months, your personality starts to show, and your personality is half nature, half nurture. And don't take me literal on the half and half, because things can obviously change. We know the brain can change. So I have a free assessment called the Performance Development Assessment that scores you in 23 personality traits, and you get a PDF that explains each personality trait. Because in certain organizations, they use psychometric testing to see, like, is your personality good for this job position?
Yeah.
And then it kind of shows you like where you would need to improve or decrease based off of it. I mean, I've helped financial advisors just increase recognition or decrease recognition with their sales, which has increased a closing rate of 25%. So some of this is just recalibrations. I mean, you don't know what you don't know type of deal. So I think half the battle is growing the awareness and then being willing to see what you're doing, which can be difficult for a lot of people, and then
Yeah.
tweaking it there. I like linear thinking, so I like to have really clear step-by-step. So I do share some things that you can intentionally do. For instance, some people, especially the type A individual, has low flexibility, or anyone who's had a lot of trauma in their past are going to have a little bit more low flexibility. And so if you want to grow your flexibility and you want to be intentional about it, you got to be willing to become uncomfortable, because that's going to be a reality to this. And number two, start saying yes to everything you can say yes to. If you say should a lot, start catching yourself. So, and if you say should a lot, typically that means you're highly conscientious, which isn't a bad thing, but sometimes that can bring a lot of oppression on you, because you're trying to do life in this yes or no, right or wrong, black or white tendency, and life is really gray at the end of the day. And so if you can kind of like take that perfectionistic pressure off of you and be like, okay, let me hold this a little bit loosely. Do I want to do this, or do I feel I have to do this? And kind of just allowing yourself some choice and play area. I mean, it's amazing how when you just kind of see things at a different angle, you can learn so much more and your perspective can broaden. So that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is just find new and different ways of seeing and doing things. And one of the best ways is just starting with your vocabulary and what you talk about.
Yeah, what you tell yourself. So that that quiz is on your website as well, is it?
Yes. Oh my gosh, you're going to laugh at the link. I didn't think about it when I wrote it, so I do apologize, but it's ElizabethLewis, LOUIS.com/performance dev ass. Didn't think about it, guys, when I wrote it.
That's okay. And something I meant to ask you much earlier was, when you're talking about trauma, I'm assuming that this can be for people as well, you know, those small T traumas, not the big T traumas, like having a brother trying to kill you. Obviously that is a trauma, but I'm assuming that a lot of smaller things that, you know, we may even have forgotten these things that occurred in our childhood, or, you know, they may be triggered by things that happen in adult life, like, you know, your best friend did something bad to you in kindergarten, and, you know, then something happens at work and that gets triggered. But I'm assuming that whenever you've talked about trauma, that we can, you know, they may be small T traumas, as I like to call them, rather than necessarily the huge ones. Is that correct?
You know, I like to tell people trauma is a spectrum at the end of the day. It's kind of like, I hate to say this, like rape's a spectrum too. Like, I think a lot of times when people hear trauma and rape, they go to like the worst case scenario that we've like depicted. And if it's not that, then it doesn't fall into the bucket. It's not fair. Narcissism is a huge spectrum too. And again, it's your perspective. So if you feel like something was traumatized, it's not fair for anyone to belittle it, because they didn't go through it at the end of the day. When you're doing trauma too, you mentioned a few things there that I just wanted to highlight. Make sure you get rid of the bitterness. The fastest you can learn how to forgive, and forgive quickly, the freer you're going to be. The fact of the matter is, all humans mess up. We all do stupid things. We're all pretty effed up at times, pardon my language there. Everyone wants forgiveness. Very few are willing to give it. And be mindful of your hypocritical ways of where you're like, I'm so mad that they did this to me. Meanwhile, you did something similar, if not the same thing, to another person. Like, get over yourself. Let it be. Let it go. Move on. Find the positive. Learn from it. Go again. Life is all a learning experience. I mean, we learn everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Just wanted to ask you what your thoughts are on neurofeedback as a way of changing our brains.
Yeah, neurofeedback is great. Neurobiofeedback is awesome. All of that stuff. You know, there are so many tools in today's world that I think it's unfair to say what works and what doesn't work, because, I mean, the placebo effect is really the most effective thing at the end of the day. So if you believe it's going to work for you, then do it. At the end of the day. I mean, we've seen, I mean, just to tell you, like, antidepressants are half a unit more effective than therapy.
Yeah.
I mean, half a unit. We're even talking about that. Or I think it's more half a unit more effective than placebo effect. I'm so sorry. I mean, like, it's amazing what your brain can create and do. So, and just like if you don't like your doctor, the prescription they give you will be less effective than if you go to a doctor that you like and trust. So if you believe it could help you, try it. I did it. I tried everything that was willing that might work, because it's like, I don't know. And sometimes things didn't work because I didn't like the person
Yeah.
providing the service.
Yep.
Psychological safety is going to be huge, especially if you've never had that imprinted in your psyche as a child. So go to the places where you feel safe. I mean, even in therapy, we found that talking to a therapist or a best friend is no different at the end of the day. Now, I would encourage you to stop talking about the things you hate and venting. Venting is actually really destructive to the brain. Talking about negativity is destructive to the brain. So when you start to speak negativity, you can actually create irreparable damage to you and the listener at the end of the day. So I always tell people, and this is what neuroscience Andrew Newberg encourages too. He's a neuroscientist from Pennsylvania. He says, for every one negative, find 3 to 5 positives. And that's the ratio at the end of the day to help get your brain back into being more of a healthy neurology. And so again, it doesn't matter if you go to a therapist or a coach, just go to someone who can provide safety, a sounding board, objective thinking, and isn't going to just join your boat for the sake of joining your boat, but it's going to challenge and help you grow. And then be willing to do the work. The only thing you can control is your effort at the end of the day.
Mm. So if you're in a situation where you are venting about something, then you're just saying, bring in some positive stuff as well.
I'm saying don't vent about it. Everyone knows what they don't like. What is talking about what you don't like really going to do besides exacerbate and grow the anger and the frustration?
Mm.
What you can do is be proactive. Okay, here's the situation. I give my clients 5 to 10 minutes of, okay, yeah, let's get it off our chest. Some people do just need to like be heard and validated. That's fair. There's a difference of like going on the merry-go-round of ruminating and kicking the same point over and over and over and again, telling me what you don't like, and the person's getting more and more aggressive and angry because of it, versus saying, okay, great, this is what you don't like. Awesome, I hear you. I'm sorry that happened. What do you want to do about it? Do you want to keep talking about how much you hated it? Because that's not going to do a darn thing at the end of the day, besides make you more frustrated, more angry, more negative. And so then we focus on what can we do about it. Okay, Sally hurt your feelings. Sorry, Sally hurt your feelings. Where is it in your control that you maybe agreed with her when you didn't have to? Where did you give her more power where you didn't have to? Where could we get you a little bit more tough-minded? You have to be tough-minded in life, unfortunately. I'm sorry. It's not necessarily the funnest thing to hear, but you have to become a little bit more tough-minded and take accountability to where you're responsible for certain stuff, right, wrong, or indifferent. No one's mad at you. And then make a concrete plan to change, to do the work, to overcome it. Because it's very easy for a human to tell you what they don't like. It's very hard for a human to tell you what they do like sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. So we're coming to the end. Obviously, love for you to tell us about your podcast and also any other service offerings, any specials that you've got at the moment that you want people to know about.
Yes, my podcast is called The Liz Show. I'm thinking of changing it to The Bottom Line, because I like to just like tell people what they need to know and then move on. So I can, because we don't have that much time in life at the end of the day. So I want to help give people strategies to move forward. And then right now I have an online self-paced course called Mindset Mastery. It goes through 8 modules with a bonus module, and it talks about every single thing in a very actionable, step-by-step, tangible plan to help you create a strong mental foundation. Because what I found is a lot of my clients were trying to build a 3rd story. And I'm like, you don't even have a 1st story. What's going to hold up the 3rd story? Like, we've got to get this strong foundation sturdy before you can go up and up and up. And so that's exactly what Mindset Mastery does, is it teaches you exactly how to build that strong mindset, how to make decisions, how to have healthy self-talk, how to shift your thinking, how to speak effectively, because that's huge in relationships, and really how to just transform your life to something more positive and hopeful so you can continue to build on it. Because I don't think we ever fully like master our mindsets, because we're always evolving and growing. And so it's like, how do we get to that next level and just get really further from the dock at the end of the day? Because I think that's what most people want, is like, get me out of this place. I want to transform. And so it's a linear application to transformation.
Okay, great. So, and just say your website again for everyone.
Oh, yes. Elizabeth Lewis, LOUIS.com.
Okay. And so the quizzes are on there, as well as the course that you just mentioned, and lots of other information as well.
Yes, exactly.
And your podcast is on all the podcast platforms?
Yes, it is. It is
Yeah.
for sure.
All right, wonderful. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Liz, and it was a really fun conversation. Lots of information for people to wrap their minds around. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Arwen, for having me. You had some awesome questions. You were a terrific host. This was so much fun.
All right, take care, Liz.